in a belief that recognizes the existence of only one God, as in monotheism. There is generally no need to use specific names to refer to the supreme deity. The word God alone carries the necessary weight and clarity to identify the being at the center of this faith. However, in the polytheistic universe of ancient civilizations, where multiple gods coexisted, the situation was completely different. There, simply saying that someone served God was not enough. It was essential to mention the name of the god or gods worshipped, making identification a fundamental part of religious practice. This can be clearly seen in the accounts of the sacred scriptures, which frequently mention names such as Baal, Dagon, and Chemos, illustrating the divine plurality characteristic of the time. The God of Israel, for example, also bore a name of his own, which was necessary to differentiate him from other deities. In the beginning, he was perceived as one specific god among many, reflecting the polytheistic roots of various Middle Eastern cultures. An episode that exemplifies this dynamic well is the dispute between the Israelites and the Ammonites, recorded in one of the biblical texts, where the right to land is placed as a divine issue. In this episode, Jephthah, an Israelite leader, makes the claim that the territory belongs to his people by divine decree. However, he does not use a generic statement, such as saying that the land was given by God. He understands the need to be clear because he is talking to people who also attributed their possessions to the support of their own gods. So he specifies, the land of the Ammonites is a gift from Chemos, their god, while the land of the Israelites was granted by the God of their people, whose name he deliberately mentions. This strategy of specifying the proper name of the God of Israel not only reinforces the legitimacy of Jephthah's claim, but also illustrates the importance of naming gods in a world where their plurality was the norm. This care in highlighting divine identity is also evident in archaeological sources that record the name of the God of Israel, shedding light on how he was recognized beyond religious texts. One artifact that plays a crucial role in this context is the so-called Mesha Stela, also known as the Moabite stone. This object, dating from the 9th century BC, is the oldest record mentioning the name of the God of Israel. Curiously, it is not an Israeli production, but a Moabite monument. It celebrates the liberation of Moab from Israelite rule, attributing this victory to the intervention of Chemos, the god worshipped by the Moabites. The narrative contained on the stele describes that Chemos, at one point, was displeased with his people, allowing them to be defeated and subjugated by the Israelites. Later, under the reign of Mesha, the god would have reconciled with the Moabites, guaranteeing them victory against Israel and restoring their independence. In a symbolic gesture of supremacy, objects from the Israelite temple were captured and placed at the feet of Chemos, reaffirming the superiority of the god of Moab over his rival. It is in this passage, which deals with the religious objects belonging to the God of Israel, that the name of this god is recorded. The inscription, made in a variant of Phoenician script, uses 4 letters equivalent to the current Yod, Re, Vav, and Re in Hebrew. This record, besides being the oldest, demonstrates the centrality of the first name as a form of identification, something that would be repeated in other artifacts over the centuries. In addition to the Mesha Stela, other archaeological finds, such as inscriptions found on a vase in the Sinai region, also bear this name, albeit sometimes in abbreviated forms. From the 7th century BC onwards, more frequent records appear showing variations of the name, such as shortened forms using only 2 or 3 letters. These examples make it clear that specific naming was an essential part of divine identity, both to differentiate between gods and to reinforce people's relationship with their protective deities. For centuries, humanity has sought to understand the mysteries surrounding sacred names and ancient civilizations' relationship with the divine. This quest, marked by archaeological discoveries such as the Mesha Stela, raises an essential question. How much knowledge remains hidden, waiting to be revealed? If you feel that there are answers missing from your spiritual journey, perhaps it's time to discover the forbidden name of Jesus. This guide is a gift for those who want to explore in depth what history has tried to silence. You can access it in the first comment attached. Take advantage of this unique opportunity to connect with a truth that could transform your life. Deciphering how the name of the God of Israel was pronounced is a challenge that involves two main barriers, the first of which is linguistic in nature. The original writing of the name, made up of the letters Yod, Re, Vav, and Re, presents a problem typical of ancient Hebrew. All the letters represented consonants. There was no record of the vowels, and the oral form of the word had to be known in order to interpret it correctly. Thus, only those who were already familiar with the term in everyday life were able to deduce its pronunciation when they encountered it in writing. This system worked well as long as the word was an active part of spoken language. However, when a word was no longer pronounced, its pronunciation fell into oblivion. Without vowels to guide them, readers of the future had no way of retrieving the original sound from the writing. This phenomenon is exactly what happened with the divine name in question, leading us to the second difficulty of a historical nature. At a certain point, the pronunciation of the name began to be avoided in the worship of the God of Israel and Judah. Originally, this was not the case. Ancient texts show the name being widely used both by Israelites and foreigners in a variety of contexts, from religious discourses to more everyday communications. However, this practice was progressively abandoned, giving way to a tendency to avoid its direct mention. The question then arises, why did this happen? Although the exact reasons are not entirely clear, historians point to two main possible reasons for this change. One may be linked to the strict interpretation of the commandment not to take God's name in vain. This zeal may have led to the recommendation not to use the name frequently for fear of disrespecting or profaning it. The second hypothesis is related to a more esoteric view, which attributed supernatural power to divine names. In this case, avoiding them would be a way of protecting this power, restricting its access only to initiates or figures of great religious authority. Regardless of the exact reason, the result was a process of restriction that reached its peak in certain religious contexts. Rabbinical texts from the first centuries, for example, report that the divine name could only be pronounced on Yom Kippur by the high priest inside the Holy of Holies in the Temple in Jerusalem. It was an almost total prohibition, reserving the pronunciation of the name only for a sacred and highly ritualized moment. In addition, there are reports among the Samaritans of a tradition in which the divine name was known only to the high priest, who passed it on secretly to his successor. This practice reinforces the idea that the name carried a deep and possibly mystical meaning, justifying its restricted use. This process of avoiding the name also began to influence writing. From the 3rd century BC, we see a significant change in the translations of the Hebrew Bible. When the Jews translated their scriptures into Greek in a work that resulted in the Septuagint, they replaced all occurrences of the proper name of the God of Israel with the terms Kyrios, which means Lord, or Theos, which is equivalent to God. This practice continues today in many versions of the Bible, where the original name is often replaced by words such as Lord or God, usually highlighted with special letters, but without directly mentioning the divine name. Although the introductions to these Bibles explain this substitution, few people pay attention to this editorial note, perpetuating the idea that the name was never mentioned in the original texts. This tendency to omit the name is also reflected in the New Testament, where it never appears directly. In its place, the words Kyrios and Theos are consistently used, corresponding to the Hebrew terms Adonai and Elohim, which had already begun to replace the proper name in Jewish tradition. This omission contrasts sharply with the oldest texts of the Old Testament, where the name was used naturally by both Israelites and foreigners. Discover what history has tried to silence. There are only a few units left of the forbidden name of Jesus. Get your free copy while you can. The historical and cultural issue of avoiding the name contributed, along with the absence of vowels in Hebrew writing, to the disappearance of the original pronunciation. This made preserving the exact sound of the name almost impossible. Even with the passing of the centuries and cultural and linguistic changes, there are several known ways of pronouncing the name of the God of Israel. Terms such as Yahweh, Yahweh, Jehovah, Yaro, and Yaru are examples of this plurality of possibilities that still circulate among scholars and religious communities. But the question arises, where did these pronunciations come from? The answer lies in two main sets of manuscripts that preserve the divine name, even after the period in which its use began to be avoided. These manuscripts, written in Hebrew and Greek, are fundamental sources for understanding the variations and complexity surrounding the vocalization of the name. The first set is made up of Masoretic texts, which represent an important evolution in Hebrew writing. During the Middle Ages, scribes known as Masoretes developed a system of vocalic signs to record vowels, something that had not previously existed in Hebrew writing. This innovation made it possible to indicate the pronunciation of words directly in the text, making it easier to understand the scriptures. In Masoretic texts, the name of the God of Israel appears thousands of times, allowing us to observe how the scribes marked its pronunciation. When analyzing manuscripts such as the Leningrad Codex, we find forms such as Yevah, Yerhovah, Yevi, and Yerhovi. From these records emerges the form Jehovah, widely used in some religious traditions. However, scholars agree that these vowel markings do not indicate the original vowels of the divine name. Instead, they suggest that other words should be pronounced instead. For example, the forms Yevah and Yerhovah refer to the vowels of the word Adonai, while Yevi and Yerhovi refer to the vowels of Elohim. This reflects the practice, already consolidated at the time of the Masoretes, of avoiding the pronunciation of the sacred name, replacing it with generic titles. Even if the vowel signs in the Masoretic texts indicated the vowels of the name itself, this would not guarantee that these were the original pronunciations. The pronunciation of Hebrew and its names has varied considerably over time. A clear example of this is the name of Moses' sister, recorded as Miriam in the Masoretic texts. In the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, made before Christ, the same name appears as Mariam, evidenced by the use of the letter Alpha in the Greek transcription. This shows that, as the Hebrew language evolved and came into contact with other languages, the pronunciation of their names also changed. Faced with the limitations of the Masoretic text to resolve the issue, we turn to the second set of manuscripts, the Greek texts. Unlike Hebrew, the Greek writing system represented vowels, which helps us to understand how the divine name was vocalized in different periods. For example, in the 1st century BC, the historian Diodorus Siculus transcribed the name with the letters iota, alpha, and omega, forming something close to IAO. This same spelling appears in Greek texts found in the Dead Sea manuscripts, dating from between the 3rd and 1st centuries BC. Irenaeus of Lyon, one of the first Christian writers, also recorded the name of the God of Israel using the Greek letters iota, alpha, and omega, forming something like EOO. Later, authors such as Clement of Alexandria and Origen also used similar spellings to try to approximate the pronunciation of the Hebrew tetragrammaton. These representations varied, as can be seen in texts attributed to Porphyry and more specifically Epiphanius, whose recorded form is particularly interesting. The spelling used by Epiphanius is close to the pronunciation Yahweh, which bears a close resemblance to Have, adopted in some modern versions of the Bible in Portuguese. The secret that connects the story to the divine mysteries is at your fingertips. Download the forbidden name of Jesus before the last free copies run out. For those who wish to understand the linguistic details that resulted in these different forms of vocalization, it is possible to explore specialized studies or interviews with linguists. One example mentioned is the interview with Estevam Fortunato from the Glossonauta channel, who discusses the history of languages and the challenges of interpreting ancient Hebrew. However, for the purpose of this video, it is enough to understand that all these Greek forms are attempts to translate or interpret the Hebrew tetragrammaton, the four letters Yod, Re, Vav, and Re, used to name the God of Israel. The term tetragrammaton, which literally means four letters, was coined by the Greeks to refer to this sacred name. However, even with these attempts at approximation, all the recorded forms are, to a greater or lesser degree, imperfect. This is due to the limitations of the Greek alphabet in capturing specific Hebrew sounds. For example, certain phonemes present in the tetragrammaton have no direct equivalent in the Greek language. This is not an error on the part of the transcriber, but a limitation of the available writing system. An illustrative case is the difficulty in representing sounds such as yarrow, which appears in some reconstructions of the name. In the Greek system, the closest sound would be something like io, which cannot fully reflect the sonic complexity of the original Hebrew. Therefore, even with the important clues provided by these records, the Greek testimony does not definitively resolve the question of how the divine name was pronounced in antiquity. It offers valuable insights, but fails to provide a conclusive answer. In addition to pronunciation, the meaning of the tetragrammaton can also provide important clues. The best-known interpretation of this name appears in the book of Exodus, when Moses has an encounter with God on top of a mountain. During this conversation, God promises to free the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. Moses, understanding the polytheistic environment in which he lived, asks an essential question. When I come to the Israelites and say, "The God of your fathers has sent me to you," and they ask, "What is his name? What shall I say?" God's answer, as recorded in the text, is intriguing. "I am the one who is," or "I am who I am," or even "I will be who I will be." This response not only points to God's eternal and unchanging character, but also establishes a direct relationship between the meaning of the name and its pronunciation, indicating that the divine essence transcends any attempt to be limited by a specific name or sound. The essential point in this discussion is the verb to be, which appears as a central element in the biblical explanation of the divine name. According to the account in the book of Exodus, God instructs Moses to say to the Israelites, "I am has sent me to you." Then God adds, "Thus you shall say to the Israelites, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is how you will call on me from generation to generation." This translation of the Jerusalem Bible, although only one of many, highlights an interesting play on words in the original text. In Hebrew, The verb to be in the first-person form is ehyeh. This word can be translated as I am, I will be, or I will be, depending on the context, since Hebrew doesn't have a specific tense for the present or a clear distinction between being and being. The meaning is inferred from the use and context in which the word appears. In the third person, the same verb becomes Yahweh or Yahuwah, which would be equivalent to he is, he will be, or he will be. This creates a parallel between the words spoken by God in the first person, I am, ehyeh, and the divine name in the third person, Yahweh. This correspondence suggests that God's name carries with it the idea of existence, presence, or eternity, reinforcing the concept of a God who is constant in all times and places. If this interpretation is correct, the pronunciation of the divine name should be close to that of the verb to be in the third person, Yahweh. This would make sense of the wordplay present in the Exodus text, directly connecting the statement, I am, to God's identity as He is. This is where the most accepted academic reconstruction comes into play, suggesting Yahweh as the closest form to the original pronunciation. This knowledge has been hidden for centuries, and units are limited. Don't miss the chance to download The Forbidden Name of Jesus while it's still available. Not all historians agree that this passage from Exodus reflects the original meaning of the divine name. Some scholars believe that this explanation may be a case of folk etymology. This term refers to the act of attributing a meaning to a word or name whose original meaning has been forgotten. In other words, the author of Exodus could have reinterpreted the divine name to create a theological and symbolic connection that didn't exist in the original usage. This type of practice is quite common in ancient texts and appears at various other times in the Bible. There are even other academic proposals about the meaning of the divine name, but none of them are widely accepted or definitively grounded. The lack of consensus reflects the difficulty in accurately determining the original context of the Tetragrammaton's use and meaning, especially considering that the oldest records date back to the 9th century BC, with the Stele of Mesha. With the passage of time, the divine name, which had previously been widely used, began to be avoided. From at least the 3rd century BC, it was replaced in various traditions by terms such as Adonai, Lord, or Elohim, God. This practice had a profound impact on the preservation of the original pronunciation, hindering any attempt to reconstruct it with absolute precision. Although historical and archaeological records offer clues as to how the name was used and pronounced, this information is fragmentary. We know that the name has undergone different adaptations, both in its writing and in its pronunciation, depending on time and space. This is to be expected, as any language undergoes changes over the centuries. Currently, the most accepted reconstruction among scholars is something like Yahweh, which in Portuguese can be translated as Yahweh or Jahve. However, this form does not summarize the complexity of the Tetragrammaton's history. The divine name is not just a matter of pronunciation, it has undergone centuries of transformations, both in its form and meaning and in the way it has been treated religiously. This trajectory reflects how different communities have dealt with the name over time, adapting it to their cultural and spiritual practices. From its frequent use in a polytheistic context to its replacement by generic titles and its preservation as a mystery, the divine name has transcended generations. Even without a consensus on its original pronunciation, it remains a symbol of spiritual connection and eternal significance. If you enjoyed the content and would like to support our work so that we can continue to bring you more in-depth research and analysis, please consider making a donation of $100. This contribution directly helps the channel grow and produce even richer material. Thank you very much for your support.